community cafe. Next, Aled Singleton and Mark Batterham will consider one-to-one walking therapy and walking groups as a way to broaden and enrich clinical approaches to treating early psychosis. And finally, Fikraya Winter will end our session by exploring the social therapeutic networks of Indonesian female domestic workers in Hong Kong. So presenters, you'll each have 10 to 15 minutes and then 5 minutes for Q&A, which I'll act as timekeeper for. But these discussions can continue over lunches and breaks. So I think that's about all of the stuff that I needed to get through. So if everyone is comfortable, Andy, are you ready to begin?
Yeah, let me just share my screen.
Just turn myself off.
So yes, I'm Andy, and I'm a third-year health and wellbeing geography PhD researcher at Lancaster University, and I'm researching facilitators and participants' experience of green care and how those experiences influence the participants' well-being over time. Today I'll be presenting some preliminary findings regarding the role of the facilitator in co-constructing enabling therapeutic encounters. I've recently finished my fieldwork, so the work I'm presenting today is really part of an ongoing conversation with the data produced. So green care, which Rich touched on in his keynote, it's an umbrella term that includes a range of activities that incorporates nature through structured and facilitated activities and have the aim of improving participants' well-being. So these activities can be delivered as health promotion projects for the general population, or as more defined programs for individuals with a specific need. For my research, I've considered group activities involving environmental conservation, gardening, farming, adventure activities, and outdoor exercise. There's three key components that have been identified as characterising green care and linking up to different types of activities, and this is the roles of the natural environment, the provision of meaningful activities, and social interaction. And there's a range of research that's highlighted the emotional, physical, and social well-being benefits to participants at the time of attending. Emotionally, this can include participants feeling empowered, improvements to their mood, confidence, and sense of meaning. Physically, improved sleep, changes to the diet, increased exercising, while socially, there's interaction with fellow participants as well as the other than human nature. And this is supported feelings of belonging, acceptance, and acts of nurture. There's been a few studies that have followed up participants post-attendance, say between 3 and 18 months later, and these studies find the benefits remain, but there's questions over how this is occurring. However, a recent study by Fenny et al. Around wilderness therapy suggests there's a supportive psychosocial environment at these activities, and this, alongside time spent in nature and being embodied in these encounters, could be facilitating shifts in participants' awareness and acceptance of themselves and the situations they're in, and they have an increase in agency and they're exploring themselves towards fulfilling their potential. So, as I said, I'm concentrating on the role of the facilitators, and I'm thinking, how does this psychosocial environment occur? And for this, I'm turning to psychotherapeutic practice, specifically humanistic psychotherapy and the person-centered approach, which was founded by Carl Rogers in the 1950s. So the therapeutic relationship nowadays is acknowledged as central to all psychotherapies. However, when Rogers proposed it, it was rather radical, seeing the client as equal and being a factor in the change. For those relationships, Rogers proposed 6 conditions, 3 of which have become known as the core conditions, and I'll touch on in a bit. And he argues that all 6 are present and therapeutic change will occur, and that those conditions are both necessary and sufficient for that change. Rogers framed change as a process. It's towards a person becoming, say, more accepting of themselves and others, having greater flexibility in their approach to life situations, and feeling more in control, confident in their life. Rogers proposed these conditions on the premise that the client is the expert of their lives, their actions, their experiences, and within them they have those capacity and resources to flourish. However, the environment we find ourselves in does affect if we flourish or not. And so if a person experiences relationships and environments that nurture their trust in their own experience, then they will trust their own process to guide and develop a sense of self, their choices. However, our experiences, actions, and behaviours are often positively and negatively valued by others. And this can lead to individuals integrating behaviours that are positively guided by others, even if they themselves value them differently. And as such, rather than trust in their own experiences, they become guided by their external valuations. And here, dissonance can occur between how the individual experiences their reality and actually how they behave within it. And this leads to incongruence, so a person may act in ways that are contradictory to how they're feeling, to what they're saying. And this Rogers viewed as the basis for psychological tension and why people come, say, to therapy. So as I said, 3 of the conditions of the 6 have become known as the core conditions and are characteristic of enabling therapeutic relationship. And these are that the therapist is authentic and genuine. In essence, they role model that being oneself is desirable, and they're also honest and open within the relationship. And the therapist is also accepting and non-judgmental of all aspects of the client. They support the client's exploration of their experience without fear of rejection or disapproval. And finally, the therapist has empathic understanding. They let the client know that they're seen, that they feel their world, and this is without a personal judgment. So the client's perspective becomes validated. And Rogers viewed that these conditions aren't just applicable to therapeutic relationships, but to all relationships, and may be present in all relationships at least some at a time, i.e. sort of good friendships, etc. And so they also started to apply this to sort of education in groups, be it, say, group therapy, leadership groups, personal development groups. And so for my methods, I've taken a phenomenological approach, because like Rogers, I view the participants as the experts, and it's through exploring with them how they perceive and interpret their lived experience, I may develop an understanding of how people experience green care and the factors involved in enabling change, as well as, say, barriers to change. And so my fieldwork has involved 11 facilitators who currently run outdoor group activities and 15 participants who attended them or started them at least 3 years ago, so some still attend. And the range of that attendance has been between 3 and 40 years ago. And so my methods have involved in-depth semi-structured interviews for all participants, but for those participants of green care, I also asked them to complete 2 creative exercises, which guided 2 interviews, and we completed together. So over the next 3 slides, I'll be sharing quotes from the facilitators, highlighting how I have interpreted their sense of authenticity, their respect and acceptance, and their empathy. So around authenticity, facilitators noted the importance of being authentic and embodying their approach. So role modeling the behaviours and values they're asking from the group for their own actions and language. And this creates kind, compassionate, accepting spaces. They also noticed the importance of being honest and open, say, for example, when offering practices. So one facilitator commented that when he's inviting participants to be mindful in nature, say, through practicing sitting for 10 minutes, that this is an option to try, and that for them, that isn't how they do it. They practice it differently by choosing, say, to stop and pause when out walking. And the facilitators also recognise that to promote a safe environment, requires role modeling through taking part in the activities, that through sharing their experiences, they're saying to students, it's okay to share yours too. And the other side of authenticity is that the facilitators practiced what they offered. They believed in their role, their desire to help people. So for an example, one facilitator really enjoyed gardening, really saw the benefits of it. And they wanted to offer a space to be in, to grow, to people without gardens. So people who've been recently homeless and end up in long-term housing situations without access to outdoor spaces. And it's the personal beliefs that fuel the facilitators in their approach, be it that through gardening you can get a sense of achievement through the grow and you can interact with others, or be it that through spending time in nature mindfully, this supports emotional regulation. And one participant described the facilitators of a project as being very kind people who are good with people, who believe in what they do it for a reason. You know these people believe in it. And there is a sense that that belief empowers the people to give these things a try, that there's something here. Another area is the respect and acceptance, that non-judgmental aspect of a relationship. And so facilitators recognise that the participants have different reasons for attending and different needs arise through this. And that there's this recognition they meet the participants where they are at. They note that the participants can say no to any invitations, but they also encourage them to give it a go, but that they can stop. And because they recognise that there are different reasons, different needs, they adapt plans and activities to fit the participant, to fit the group, what they're interested in, what they're willing to try. And this flexibility approach includes ensuring that members of the group are satisfied and safe with the tasks that they're doing, and that facilitators raise this importance of providing choice, not telling something what to do. That to be able to choose for themselves may not be something they're used to or have opportunities to do. And so regarding this can be selecting seeds to plant, to promote ownership tasks, to have a sense of achievement when they grow. Another key area is that participants did not judge, facilitators didn't judge participants' behaviour. And this included areas around timekeeping and regular attendance. So there's acceptance that due to their situation, they may have difficulties attending regularly or arriving at the start. And one facilitator also noted the importance of allowing participants independence, to give them the space to choose how they interact with the activities on offer. That part of what people get from attending these projects is not just the activities, the group, the place, but having a chance to take a break when they want, just to go off, to be away from them, and not to be watched by the people that typically they cared for. And so this importance of being non-judgmental, accepting, providing choice is part of building trust in relationships where participants feel safe to try new activities. And this trust in participants can be explicit, so through allowing to use them tools and trusting them with them that they're going to use it safely, to be in subtle, say, not following the participant around, but trusting they're capable of completing the task, but standing back. And participants know to be given this trust, to be accepted and respected, was empowering to try things their way, but also for how they felt that day, to be taken into account and responded to as being valid, as being acceptable. And the facilitators' empathy and understanding of participants also informed their relationship and their trust in participants. So one facilitator explained how participants had difficulties communicating, and it was through spending time with them that the facilitator improved their understanding, that person's style of communication, and recognised that this person has a sophisticated understanding of how to say manage the allotment, and knew how to use a range of different tools and machines, which other staff there didn't realise, and that by allowing him to do what he wanted, even so maybe it wasn't clear in the, say, more typical way people communicate, was really respectful of his expertise and really affirmative for him, that they trusted him, that he knew what he was doing and this was okay. And another facilitator notes the importance of gently inquiring how participants' lives are going, recognising because of their situation, they may be the only person asking about it that week, but they asked without a pressure chance and they listened without judgment. And that this approach they felt developed trust and offered participants a space to talk openly. As well as facilitators noting the importance of recognise how is someone feeling, reflecting on is this feeling comfortable for that person, for the group, in terms of how to manage the group and the activities, and considering, well, what does this person require from today to get what they need from it? Sorry, I'm tripping over my words. And so you've got those three facets, and participants experience them. They experience this atmosphere that was fostered as accepting, as non-judgmental, as understanding, less pressurized. And this has supported their engagement, their attendance, the social interaction, with participants recognising the importance of these spaces as somewhere they don't have to explain why they're attending, and that their behaviours are not judged or viewed as limiting. And so one participant noticed that their attendance was one of the factors, and as a part of a process alongside counselling, that through this, that their OCD became less a part of their identity, that facilitators, participants at the farm, they didn't comment on it, they didn't make a scene of her behaviours, and this acceptance, this not being judged, provided a space for the OCD to become less of a focus, and essentially changed how she met herself. That change in self-concept was occurring there. And for a number of participants, they continue to attend these programs if possible as a volunteer, or they find other programs, other groups which are similar for the purpose of supporting their well-being. They notice this importance to them and maintaining a sense of belonging, feeling part of the community, say through a group, and contributing to that community for the activities they do with that group. And it might be that the qualities that are present in these groups, these places, aren't available elsewhere in their lives. So there's a purposeful seeking out with them to support their well-being over time. So, as noted, this is a work in process. This is an ongoing conversation, considering how does relational encounters occur, what are the qualities of them that supports and enables spaces. And so, but looking at this, I'm only focused on one layer of these people's experiences. There is other factors involved. And for me, I think showing how facilitators relate to participants and offer activities to Green Care, provide those participants a chance to be met in a positive relationship. And this does seem to be a theme common in enabling care as a social environment that is caring, that is kind. And for me, I think looking at psychotherapeutic understanding of the qualities is one way to frame how these positive experiences of awareness arises and impacts on participants' well-being. So thank you for listening, and any questions? I'll just come off my screen.
Thanks so much, Andy. That was really, really interesting. And you have a really calming voice. So I was just there like zoning out. Does anyone have any questions for Andy? Can we see the chat box? I'm not very good at that. Can you see it, Andy? Is there any questions in it? If not,
I've shocked people into silence.
It's the voice. The voice has just calmed us all into like a zone. I guess I have a question. It's quite a big question, so feel free to answer it however you fancy. Do you think landscape has become something that you can prescribe as a cure for people who are suffering in various ways? I think that this has come about for me because of the pandemic, and you know, take your 30 minutes of exercise and things like this, and you're starting to see it prescribed. And I was just wondering what you thought on that.
I think there's something in social prescribing, in the green prescribing, and I think there is something about offering people a chance to relate to what's going on for them, say loneliness, say what we label depression, anxiety, say grief, and to meet it in a different way outside a clinical context. There is something about going to places that aren't where you might go for your mental health, that stigma isn't there. And so, yeah, people noticed that they did talk about their mental health in time with other participants, with facilitators, because it was a walking group, because it was gardening. It didn't have that, you must talk about yourself, that you could do it alongside an activity, so there's not that looking at each other, which can be, especially for men it seems in therapy, a very difficult thing to do, sat in a room with a therapist. My concerns over social prescribing, and I'll hold my hand up, it may not be that well founded, it's an area I'm still getting to grips with, is within therapy, so I'm a person-centered therapist, is that cognitive behavioral therapy, because of the evidence behind it, because of those randomized control trials, are taken as the form of approach to work for people to work with on problems and issues, and they become manualized. And it's almost like if we offer these certain tasks, if we do this in a set procedure, people get better, and you eradicate the relationship, you eradicate getting to know the person, you end up actually working with the symptoms rather than the person. And so my concern with green care is it, here's a garden, here's some tools, here's some activities, here's some social interaction, and that isn't the case for everyone. And it's, again, it feels like it's about how those people are met there and how they need to, and how they're given time to be understood. And so I think looking at, part of my thesis, looking at the facilitators, sort of recognising their role of the facilitators in the interviews and what they say and how participants are describing their experience of facilitators. So it's really important to say, yes, go ahead on the prescriptions, but allow the variation, recognise actually the real skill involved in meeting people in a space that's free from judgment and the benefits that can provide people. Does that answer your question?
It's an unanswerable question that I'm kind of grappling with myself. So yeah, it's interesting to hear your take. We've got a couple of more questions, but I'm going to say, I've got one in a direct message, so I'll send that to you, and then one on everyone, and maybe you could respond to them separately whilst we just move on to the next presentation, if that's all right. Excellent. It's just such a tight turnaround.
That's okay.
So thank you so much.
Okay, so the presentation today is called Outside the Therapy Room, and it's about exploring geographical concepts and methods to support early psychosis recovery. So my name is Dr. Aled Singleton. I've got a background in, I guess, human geography, but I've just done a PhD, which is about gerontology and emotional attachments to place and space. And if I pass over to my colleague, Mark. So we're going to alternate in this presentation.
Hello, I'm Mark Batterham. I'm a community nurse, and I'm working in an early intervention and psychosis service in Bath and North East Somerset.
Cheers, Mark. So yeah, so it's a kind of a combination between the two of us. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the barriers and opportunities to influence clinical practice in mental health services, which is what Mark's going to talk about. And then I'm going to come back to some of the theoretical things in terms of human geography and some anthropology as well. And then pass back to Mark to talk about the case study in Bath and North East Somerset. And finally, we're going to discuss the service evaluation we're both involved in at the moment. So on to you, Mark. Okay, so as a starting point, and perhaps a case of stating the bleeding obvious, we can say with a degree of confidence that social and spatial isolation both contributes to and exacerbates mental health difficulties. Yeah, in their 2018 paper evaluating an urban walk and talk group for mental health service users in London, Muir and McGrath describe a hostile landscape for interventions and services that focus on reducing isolation through promoting connection with others. Cultural norms and influences permeate and to some extent shape mental health services. In particular, notions of self-sufficiency and individual resilience deny both the social nature of humans and the isolated lives that perpetuate mental health problems. It frames service users as consumers of public services and individualizes and limits treatment. Systemic interventions in general and interventions that extend beyond the family in particular are relatively rare across mental health services.
In her memoir, The Last Asylum, Barbara Taylor refers to the language of avoiding dependency, which has, under austerity, been used to justify service cuts. However, to counter this rather bleak picture, there are also opportunities. There is a tradition of community initiatives within mental health care, and the majority of staff do not seem to consider or relate to service users as consumers. The service users movement, the endurance of progressive traditions, and a working culture that undermines or at least slows the spread of the neoliberalisation of mental health care creates the space for interventions and approaches that foreground relationality. By persuasively deploying the invest to save argument, early intervention and psychosis services have carved out a niche towards the progressive end of the spectrum of statutory mental health services in England. The approach used is a holistic one that encompasses psychological, occupational, social, and educational interventions alongside medication. This fosters a culture of innovation that provides the context and opening for our project, which we'll be introducing to you later. The hostile landscape also applies to the daily lived experiences of mental health service users, the vast majority of whom now reside outside of formal mental health settings. Hester Parr argues that many service users experience spatial and social exclusion as a result of their weak economic position, attitudinal stigma within the community, and under-resourced and overstretched public services. Numerous community spaces previously accessible to marginalised and less powerful groups have closed under austerity and the politics of localism. Service users have been left to navigate what 19th century novelists such as Honoré de Balzac and contemporary urban writers such as Richard Sennett refer to as the indifference and anonymity of the city. We are left wondering what then has become of care in the community, and how can we raid the vaults of geographical knowledge to help address this matter? I'm going to pass back to Alid now.
Thanks, Mark. So I'm going to talk about some of the geographical concepts. So what you see here is an image actually of the clinic in Bath, so this is where quite a lot of the mental health provision actually happens. But what I wanted to talk about really was actually following up on some of the things that Mark talked about in terms of urban informality. So formal space could be seen as space which has been kind of regulated through the planning system, or but you know, it has to start somewhere. So for example, the planning system in the UK actually started out based on sort of sanitation and drainage. It started out as a health kind of incentive. But this idea of informality is quite interesting, and the paper by Banks, Lombard and Mitlin talks about how it's not just about the global south that has kind of informal spaces. So in a way, the kind of informality is also about the space for innovation. It's also about the space for co-production, as it's less a purely geographical term, and it's also a bit of a philosophical idea. So one of the things that we'll talk about in a little bit is about urban walking groups. This is actually an image taken from some of the PhD research that I did, but it connects into some of the things we'll talk about in a minute. So there's a really interesting paper by Muir and McGrath, which Mark did mention earlier on, and talking about the walk and talk group, and particularly this concept of the meshwork. And there's an interesting quote here from Tim Ingold, who is essentially an anthropologist, although often referenced by human geographers. So he calls the meshwork the tangle is the texture of the world, and that beings do not simply occupy the world, they inhabit it. And in doing so, in threading their own paths through the meshwork, they contribute to the ever-evolving weave. Now that sounds fairly complex, but we'll break it down in a minute. And it's about, in a way, how they're taking the therapy into outdoor space and into walking groups kind of exposes this complex meshwork. And Ingold also talks about kind of the knotted nature of the lines that we take through life. So these are some of the concepts that come through Muir and McGrath, and that place can be a kind of a fossilized trauma of loneliness and loss, and that certainly relates back to some of my research into emotional attachment to space, that some spaces are spaces that people have for them capture loss and loneliness. But then also there within this kind of meshwork of space, there are opportunities for therapy. And I like to kind of go back to that idea of the knotted line or the knotted body that you can massage. And importantly, there is this idea of remaking everyday space through connectivity and collectivity indeed. So this is actually one of the shots that Mark took from some of the group walks that have been ongoing in the past couple of years. And just one final perspective, this comes from Tina Richardson, who she's more of a cultural theorist, but she's interested in psychogeography and some of the Deleuzian concepts that to experience space as an altered state helps to understand the totalizing perspectives of space that capitalism encourages. And that kind of comes through about how the work that Mark has been doing is actually just trying to find a small niche within a big system. So Mark, if you can talk about the case study.
Sure, thanks, Alid. So early intervention and psychosis services are driven by clinical standards and guidelines. These are called the IRIS guidelines, and they outline what an optimum service model looks like. As well as individual and family interventions, these guidelines also encourage the development and delivery of social activity groups. Although the stated rationale for this is to increase an individual's confidence in social situations, it does provide an opening for interventions that combine what Mira and McGrath describe as shared meaningful activity, reciprocal relationships, and a space for connected relationality. Already established groups in our service include a badminton group and a weekend coffee group. We set up the walking group in May 2019. Staff take turns to facilitate regular walks around the city and the surrounding district. Service users attend regularly or sporadically. We have kept going since we started with short breaks over the winter months and during the depths of the national lockdowns. The aim of the group is to support service users to claim what Henri Lefebvre and David Harvey refer to as their right to the city, to remake everyday spaces, to connect with restorative urban and green environments, and to provide a space for new friendships to germinate. In addition to the group, since the start of the pandemic, many clinical sessions and reviews that would ordinarily have taken place within a therapy room have taken place either virtually or outside in and around service users' neighbourhoods. Many staff and service users have noticed unexpected accidental benefits to this approach, which has been born out of the desire and necessity for face-to-face contact. Over to you, Ali.
So I'm trying to get the screen. Yeah, so the service evaluation is something that I've come in and helped Mark on. So this is a project which has been gestating for a couple of years actually, but starting in spring 2021, Mark has made the case actually within the Avon and Wiltshire NHS Trust for a service evaluation to look at gather the evidence base and actually evaluate the work done so far. So alongside the two of us, there's also a psychologist, Dr. Pamela Jacobson, and a psychiatrist, Dr. Alpana Bose. So they're both helping us to kind of oversee the project. On the right hand side of the screen here, you can see this is actually the cricket pitch next to the Royal United Hospital in Bath, which is a place where we've done quite a few of the interviews so far. But it's also the kind of the setting that some of the clinicians have started to be able to actually do some of the one-to-one therapy. We've done a pilot interview and since then interviewed 4 staff members and recently started to interview some of the service users as well. And it's been quite interesting to get the perspective of the past couple of years. And going back to some of the meshwork ideas, the service users have really explained that being able to interact with people who are maybe at different stages of therapy has been really useful to them. And they've had the kind of conversations there that wouldn't happen necessarily at the clinic itself. I think it'd be useful now just to kind of go back to Mark and for him to explain, you know, Mark's definitely a bit of an agitator, a bit of a revolutionary, I think, within the NHS to get this work to be taken seriously. So Mark, if you could just explain a little bit more about what you want to do next, and also how you've got backing to make this a serious study.
Sure. Yeah. So we're so it's sort of an exciting point in our project here. So yeah, our trust, the trust I work for, is funding the next stage of our project, where I'll be reviewing the literature relating to psychosis in the urban environment, and developing collaborative relationships with other research groups. So it's really great to meet some of you today. This is the first time I presented anything like this at all. So our plan beyond this is to recruit. So I'll be researching the literature, and beyond this, our plan is to recruit service users and carers to our project team, work alongside them to design a research study that supports either preventative or treatment interventions. And we're getting support from the National Institute of Health Research and their research design service to do this. So yes, so you've got an exciting point, and we look forward to hopefully updating you in due course. We put a list of references together for you as well, should you need it. Thanks very much.
Yeah, I'm trying to get the reference slide up. Here's the reference slide, which we can also send out as well. And these are contact details if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Awesome. That was really great, guys. Thank you. Let's just see about the questions. If not. Okay, well, I'll start then. I guess the perk of being host, you get to ask all the questions. How did you find working with each other, I guess? From what I understand, Mark, you're from the NHS, did you say? And more traditionally academic, Aled, how did you ever clash heads? Did you kind of just naturally get on? Do you have different opinions? You know, it's interesting to hear.
You go first, Mark.
You stitched me up there, Ali.
I don't mind.
Yeah. No, yeah, Aled and I actually met in 2019, Aled? Was that 2018? Yeah, 2019 at Environmental Psychology Annual Conference in Cardiff. Aled was presenting his research in his PhD, and I was sitting in the audience, and I said to Aled in the break that his research had, I think, accidental benefits in terms of great therapeutic value. So we had a really interesting conversation in the break over lunchtime, and we've sort of remained in contact after that. And I think it's been a really interesting relationship because Aled's introduced me to lots and lots of really interesting material, and has provided a step into the world of sort of health geography and geography in general. Really, I have done a postgrad course in urban planning recently, but it's been brilliant to sort of I suppose we're sort of like boundary spanners really. We've got one foot in mental health care and one in health geography now. So it's I don't know if you got any other reflections, Aled?
Yeah, it's I mean, at this stage, all of the work that I've put into the project has been very much pro bono. So it is based on, you know, just striking up a good relationship with Mark actually at that conference, and then carrying it through. Mark and some of his colleagues came to one of the events I did for my PhD research in 2019. So yeah, it's really good to kind of cross over disciplines. I'm also a bit of I've come to academia mid-career. I spent a lot of my career doing community regeneration and community development work, and working for lots of third sector organizations. So yeah, I do like the way that Mark has just been sort of refusing to back down within the NHS and just pushing ahead with all of this, and to actually get it on the NIHR. I'm from Wales, so we have a different system in Wales, but to get it on that pathway is really good, and hopefully it'll bear some fruit, really.
Really excellent. Right, thank you so much. If we get any more questions, oh, here we go. We've got one right. Can you see that one? I'll try and read it aloud. What are the institutional challenges involved in introducing these sorts of new models in the context of the NHS? You mentioned the example of having to pitch the work as investment to save. Oh, I don't like that phrase. Go on.
Yeah. Yes. That institutional challenges. Yeah. Well, I would say, yeah, I think I outlined some of them at the beginning, really, in terms of how treatments have become sort of, I think it was earlier mentioned by one of the other presenters about some treatments become sort of manualised and individualised. The service I work in is more sort of open to sort of creative approaches, but I think what broader beyond that within the NHS is something that I think it was Andy that said about everything having to be measured and quantified. And in order for it to be sort of backed officially through the NHS, that's really important of making the case for evidence-based practice. But sometimes that sits, that's quite hard in this area that we're looking at here, as Andy already spoke about. So I think there are a number of methodological and institutional challenges here. But I'm hopeful that we can navigate our way through it. Yeah, I don't really like using the investor safe argument, but sometimes that can win you some additional points.
And going back to the other question about social prescribing, I think it's actually been massively beneficial to the staff so far. I think it's really liberated a number of the clinicians I've spoken to. I interviewed a psychiatrist, and it really, I think, liberated her practice in many ways as well. So I've got a bit more experience of kind of organizational development and sort of researching the anthropology of organizations. So I hopefully it will build up some steam, and I'm not so sure how much more formal it will become, but I think it was good that we're able to kind of explore the informal space that this project allows, and just kind of harness that for the meantime, really.
Excellent, thank you so much. I think we should leave it there. I'm so sorry, could you correct me on your pronunciation of your name?
Yeah,
I'm butchering it.
It's Kriawinata, but you can call me Fik. I go by Fik, yeah, so it's easy.
Yeah, thank you so much for being so polite. Are you ready to present?
Yes, so let me share my screen and let me know if it works. Can anyone see my screen?
It's working perfectly.
All right, awesome. All right, so I think I can start, right?
Yep, go ahead.
All right. Hello, everyone. Here in the US, it's very early morning, so good morning. I'm Fikria Winata. I'm from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and today I would like to share to you about some of my dissertation research on the importance of therapeutic landscape and networks on female domestic workers' health and well-being. So my research has been focusing on the everyday life of Indonesian female domestic workers, specifically who work in Hong Kong. So I would like to start by showing you these pictures. So on the right side is actually the domestic worker are gathering. This is actually follow the Hong Kong COVID policy restrictions. So they sort of like only maximum 2 people in one spot. And then on the left side is the pictures of one of the therapeutic landscape for one of Indonesian domestic worker, one of my research participants. So although I gather a lot of quantitative data from my survey, but I also got some sort of like open-ended survey response. And these are two of them. So first, one of my research participants said, oh, before COVID and during COVID pandemic, I always visited and enjoy water scenery in Hong Kong, and I felt so relaxing. So this sort of like representation of one of the water scenery in Hong Kong itself. And the other open-ended quote said, oh, spending my rest day, I will tell you what is rest day in a minute, with other domestic workers made me feel happier and relieved. So I want to tell you a little bit of background about domestic workers. So we know what is domestic worker, and that's those people who perform household tasks such as cooking, cleaning, taking care of children, elderly, gardening, and sort of like stuff at home. And in particular, I'm talking about in Asian context. So these are a growing number of low-educated, unskilled women from developing countries in Southeast Asia, such as from Indonesia, the Philippines, Myanmar, Thailand, move to other developed countries or special regions such as to Singapore, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, and other countries. And domestic workers are particularly vulnerable because of two things. First, the intensive work responsibility. We know domestic workers are very demanding, and this actually limit women mobility within a space-time constraint. And also, this daily tasks restrict domestic workers from social interaction outside their employer's home. So what does it mean? So when a woman, in particular, again, I mentioned in the Asian context. So when a person live and work as domestic worker, so they actually live with their employers. So they live at their employer's home. So their place of life, which their employer's home, and their place of employment, where also their employer home, are actually in the same place. So this collocation issue sharply limits the personal freedom and sense of privacy. And I'm thinking about, if they cannot get this sort of like sense of life, maybe there are public places in which they can gather this essential setting of and to gain their aspect of well-being. And they also can build social interaction in public places and also social relationship, and can create social network. And in Hong Kong in particular, which not all Asian countries regulate this mandate rest day. In Hong Kong in particular, the government mandate rest day in which each employer should provide their domestic workers 1 day off, or we call rest day, after 7 days of working. So then domestic worker can go to different places they want, and can also doing other activities outside their work task related. So I'm glad that I'm actually the last presenter in this session, because previous presenter mentioned a lot about therapeutic landscape, therapeutic spaces. So my study in particular, I use this therapeutic landscape network. We all know that Professor Will Gazzler in 1992 proposed this concept, so as a landscape associated with healing treatment, and this concept actually expanding, in particular start into 2000, a lot of application of therapeutic landscape, not only researching about the physical aspect of the landscape itself, but also they start applying this concept into different population groups, such as there are a lot of study on how older adult experience therapeutic landscape through gardening and other activities. And the other concept I derive in my study, I draw in my study, is therapeutic networks. So maybe this concept is actually introduced subsequently on the therapeutic landscape. So Dr. Smith defined the therapeutic network as a presence of care and support provided by the agent of support, such as family, friends, and therapists. I think Mark and Alan talked a lot about the third agent of support. So For the female domestic worker in Hong Kong in particular, their therapeutic network are mainly their other fellow domestic workers. So that when they go out their employer's home, they can meet other domestic workers. And remember, in Hong Kong, they don't have any families there, right? So these support from other domestic workers are very important. So the objective and of my study, I would like to explore a new application of therapeutic landscape and network on women with domestic employment and particularly living in foreign country, who actually face significant space-time concern in their everyday life. And I mostly use quantitative methods. And again, I mentioned that I have a lot of quantitative data on my survey. And I also have some sort of like open-ended responses. And I hypothesize that in general, women who build social therapeutic network and frequently visit their therapeutic landscape are healthier and have higher social well-being. So to do this study, I administer online survey. I'm in the US and my research participants are in Hong Kong. And again, we all experienced this during COVID pandemic. We utilize a lot of virtual fieldwork. I did that. I did that too. And I gathered quantitative data and also qualitative or open-ended responses. And the survey, the health and well-being survey was in Bahasa Indonesia. So I can sort of like reach out large group of population of domestic worker in Hong Kong. And I work with one of non-profit organization, Dompet Duafa. So this non-profit organization provides religious education and social program for female domestic worker in Hong Kong. And my data collection was from September, actually late August. That's when my IRB approved. And I start gather the data in September and December 2020. And keep in mind that during that pandemic, the COVID-19 policy changed in Hong Kong over the time. So, such as here from August to December, I highlight this gathering restriction and gathering policy because that's gathering number of people. I show you at the beginning of the presentation, sort of like people only can gather 4 at one particular spot in the park, and then 4 and 4, so they couldn't like gather a lot. And in particular in December, the regulation actually asked them to only gather 2 people. So that's actually affect how many people can actually be gather, because because I use this therapeutic network concept. So this is very important for my research. So these are some items on the data that I gather. So I have several sections. So the self-directed health condition, subjective well-being, therapeutic landscape, and network. So each items actually have sort of like different questions. And when I designed this survey, I follow the US National Health and Nutrition Examination. So that's from the CDC. And for the well-being, I sort of like adopt the National Science Council, especially for the panel on measuring subjective well-being. So I learned from these 2 survey to design my own. And this is very modeling, sort of like statistical analysis. I use 2 different statistical methods, the confirmatory vector analysis and multiple logistic regression. And in particular for the CFA, this is actually to assess the model fit and how we can tell whether this model actually can measure the variable present at the number of constructs. And there are several criteria when the model fits, such as the chi-square. We want the small chi-square to indicate that's the model acceptable, and the comparative fit index, we want the value greater than 0.95, and for the Ramsey, we want a smaller value, which is less than 0.06. And I also ran the multiple logistic regression. This is in particular to model the health and therapeutic landscape, health and therapeutic network, well-being and therapeutic landscape, and well-being and therapeutic network, adding by other domestic worker criteria such as age, marital status, and years of living and working in Hong Kong. So these are some, this is the conceptual models. As you can see here, for the perception of therapeutic landscape, I have several different questions. And for therapeutic network as well, especially asking their, like, how this social group can support them, how this network with other domestic worker can support their everyday life. And for the health, self-directed health condition and subjective well-being, such as asking them about their general feelings of happiness and life satisfactions. And also I have these other individual characteristics as well. And these are the research, the participants of my study. Thankfully, I can get 190 survey response. I think that's quite a good number for virtual data collection during COVID. I'm so happy with that. And the age, actually, the age of the female domestic worker in Hong Kong are mostly in 36 to 40 and 41 to 45 years old. This is in these two age group. And living and staying and working in Hong Kong, most of them are 2 to 5 years and 6 to 10 years. And this is a very small number for less than 2 years. The reason why I include that, because the first 2 years is actually the first time they come to Hong Kong to work. And that's actually, they are in the first contract cycle of working. And I just want to tell you, this is my confirmatory analysis results. So my health and therapeutic landscape model are pretty good. I did modify a little bit on the well-being and therapeutic networks to get the model fit. And these are actually the table shows the standardized factor loading. So we can see that sort of from for a health aspect, the present health condition and health condition within a month are actually the highest loading. And for the well-being, their life satisfactions and the overall their happiness are also the highest loading. And the therapeutic landscape, the presence of therapeutic landscape in their everyday life is actually also the highest loading. And for therapeutic network, the items of asking them whether or not they can share their problem into the group of or their network, and also whether they can, whether this group whether they actually feel happy when they are in the group. So they are actually at the highest loading as well. So the last table I have, this is from the multiple logistic regressions. This is a giant table, but I will tell you what is this table in a minute, in the next slide. So actually, from the previous table, I can tell you that the therapeutic landscape and social network have positive association with subjective well-being. So this means, so people who have frequently visited their therapeutic landscape and engage with their social network actually have higher level of well-being. So this actually consistent with my hypothesis that I tell you in this presentation. And also the relationship between therapeutic network and health condition is positive and significant, which this might indicate that those who frequently gather, and then also even like during COVID, because during the COVID we felt so isolated, right? So when they can gather with their peer, they feel like, oh yeah, I'm good about life and I can feel happier. So that's actually might affect their health condition as well. And the association between therapeutic landscape and self-directed health condition was actually negative. So I was thinking, I spent a week actually to think about this, and I realized that during the COVID-19, the gathering policy and the COVID policy in the Hong Kong, it might affect domestic worker in terms of like their visit to places. So the use of places might decrease during the COVID pandemic because of that regulation and you know, it's a COVID pandemic in general, which people didn't go out, and particularly for domestic worker, their employer asked them, hey, don't go out during your rest day because we want to minimize the spread of the risk of coronavirus. So lastly, this is my conclusion. So in Hong Kong, when the government regulates a mandate rest day, the female domestic worker able to visit their therapeutic landscape and build the social connection. And they also can attend different activities such as social, religious, and other activities outside their home. And although my study is very preliminary and this is work on progress, I can confirm that this study can confirm that the important role of social therapeutic network and also the benefit of visiting therapeutic places can contribute to women's health and well-being. Besides, again, the COVID pandemic might affect the role of place itself. And then lastly, as domestic workers visit their therapeutic landscape, meet and connect with their social network, their separated health condition and subjective well-being might improve. So that's my presentation, and thank you so much for listening, and I will take a question.
Awesome, thank you so much. You're a very natural speaker. I'm very jealous.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. You mentioned in your survey about favourite places. What kind of landscape do you think is ideally suited to well-being? There's no right answer.
Right, that's great question. Thank you so much. So as I go to 190 response, and it's very interesting because a lot of people mentioning more than one place actually, for sort of like one survey response said my favorite places that can make me feel good about life and make me happier. Parks, a lot of parks actually appear on that response, like because in Hong Kong they do good job on providing parks to the residents. And Victoria Park, there's a very famous park in Hong Kong in Causeway Bay, appear a lot. And other parks, they have like sort of different characteristics of park. They have bird park. They have there's just like mostly bird in that park, and they have butterfly beach. There's like butterfly beach park, so mainly like a lot of sort of butterflies on that park. So park appear a lot in the surveys as favorite places they can view as therapeutic. And also water scenery, because in Hong Kong they have a lot of pier, a lot of beaches, and also even one of tourist attractions, Sim Sa Choi. It's one of their favorite places as well. That's actually very tourist centric, but I think that view is stunning. So I've been there. So I was like, I wasn't surprised if I found this, because that is beautiful. Yeah.
I really need to visit Hong Kong. It's like on my bucket list. I would suggest that if you could answer Rich's question, which is in the chat, privately, and I'm just going to pass over to Louise because we're out of time. Is that all right? Excellent.
Grand. So just wanted to say thank you so much to all of our presenters and our chair as well, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. It's such an inspiring little session as well to hear about research with the relationships of land for the users, but also for people that aren't necessarily the first thought of research, so people that are helping people access these landscapes as well. So thank you so much. We're now moving on to our lunch break and networking opportunity. So I'm hoping that if technology allows me, I'm going to set up a breakout room. So we're going to have two different rooms, one where there's just a quiet reflection where you can just have your own kind of lunch together. You don't have to speak to anyone if you're feeling anxious about talking to anyone. And then we'll also have a chatty room where you can go and network with other people, learn about different research, and also ask further questions if you want to as well. I'm aware that some of the presenters might need to take some time away and disappear off the Zoom session, so please feel free to reach out to them right now and try and get more of your questions answered right now as well. So this is what the kind of process of what we're going to do next looks like. So after the break, we're going to come back with Dr. Michael Hardman from the University of Salford, and he's going to be speaking about urban agriculture, mostly in Greater Manchester, and his interdisciplinary work that he's been conducting. We'll then move into session 2, where we'll be looking at using natural resources for health and well-being, and that kind of covers everything from blue spaces all the way up to farming. And then we've got session 3 looking at the relationships of the body. So this is covering a little bit of everything and anything. So feel free to kind of pop into these sessions when you need to, and also take part in the networking as well. I'd also like to just give you a heads up about how we're partnering with the University of Salford. So with this, we've also got more social events kind of coming up, and this is one of the ones that we'd like to kind of highlight to you. So if you're interested in hearing some live music and some artistic kind of illustrations from the University of Salford, feel free to kind of sign up to this event happening tomorrow night. So you'll be able to watch and listen to the students that are currently at the university. Something a little bit different, and it's something just nice to add on to the conference as well. I'll pop in the chat the actual link to this page as well, so you can sign up at any point. But yes, we will be back at 1 o'clock with Mike, so feel free to go get some lunch, pop into the networking room if and when you want to, and we'll see you back at 1. Thank you.